welcome to the Geneva Benefits Pastors Call Package webinar. My name is Ingrid Krein, and I'm a retirement planning specialist here at Geneva. Today, I'm joined by Dave Endreg. He is my coworker and fellow panelist, a senior financial planner here and a CFP. In addition to his certified financial planner credentials, he is also a teaching elder in the Gulf Coast Presbytery. Our presenter today is Don Alden. Don is director of the Geneva Benefits Retirement Readiness Team and clerk of the Georgia Foothills Presbytery. Before we get started, I want to point out to you that at the bottom of your screen, there are two sections you can use to ask questions: the Q&A or question and answer section, or the webinar chat area. So Dave and I, as your panelists, may be answering your questions via text here, or we may throw them out live. So you can ask them as the webinar is going on. There's no need to wait, but there will be an opportunity at the end of the webinar for you to ask your questions at that time as well. So we'll just throw it on over to Don Alden and have a good seminar.
Thank you, Ingrid. We're just really pleased that you join us. We know that your schedules are pretty busy, but we believe this is a really important topic in the life of ministers and those who support ministers. What I'm going to do first is I'm just going to lay out the general principles of a call, how that relates to a call package, and then we'll go into the specifics. We all know that a call, excuse me one second. We all know that the call of a pastor has three components. There is the internal call, the belief that God has in our heart of hearts and in our minds has called us to ministry. There's an external call, that is, there's some a group out there, a church typically, that basically says, yeah, we want to be able to help you pursue that internal call, and they might support you in your training, but they certainly might request Presbytery to bring you on as an assistant pastor, an associate pastor, or a senior pastor. But the third component is that a call is confirmed by a church court, and in our case, that is the presbytery. BCO 20-1, our Book of Church Orders, says that the call must be written, hence the call package and our resources, the call package guidelines, and that the call must include the financial arrangements. And the financial arrangements, and I think this is really critical to understand, because when I first entered into ministry, I didn't realize this until I served as chair of the RUF committee for the North Georgia at the time, but Georgia Foothills Presbytery. I always had this idea that the call was something that happened, and the call package was something that happened at the beginning or the initiation of my employment with a church. But one of my the RUF ministers that we supported, Al LaCour, said, no, this call package actually has an ongoing life because the arrangements between the pastor and the church are always changing. Therefore, a call package is that which captures this dialogue between the pastor as employee and the church as employer. And a call package is not therefore only at the start of your ministry or at the change. Let's say that you go to a new church, or you go from assistant pastor to associate, but it's basically for every season of life spent in ministry. We believe it to be an ongoing kind of a living document that defines this relationship between you as the pastor and the church or organization that you're serving. So all that we're talking about here is in that context. And if you have questions about that, as Ingrid pointed out, please feel free to add a comment in the chat, and we can talk about that a little bit more. The important takeaway here is it's not just for the start of ministry, but every minister should be interested in what their call package is at this moment. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the specifics. Discussions per BCO, the Book of Church Order, discussions are needed regarding these financial arrangements. And BCO 20-5 says that we have these discussions so that you, the minister, may be free from worldly cares and avocations. This discussion occurs among three parties: you, the pastor, you, the lay leader, if we have lay leaders here, and presbytery. And so there's a dialogue between these three parties. Most of the dialogue, as we know, occurs between the pastor and the lay leaders at their church. But as we know, presbytery approves all initial calls and changes in call if a minister moves from a status of, say, associate to senior pastor. And these discussions, they can be hard and they can be awkward, but we're here to basically affirm that they're necessary. And we also want to say that the BCO itself affirms that these discussions are necessary. The Apostle Paul affirms that these discussions, not only in Timothy here, I believe he talks about it in the, I believe, 1 Corinthians, where he's talking about the importance of compensating those that are engaged in ministry as a vocation. And so this should not be something that we shy away from. We affirm that God uses the ordinary means, and compensation is the ordinary means by which we are supported in the work that God has called us to do, that the church has allowed us to do, that's been confirmed by our presbytery. Call package is going to have four components. It's going to have a compensation component, a retirement component, an insurance component, and a well-being component. And what I'm going to do is walk through each of those components that make up a call package in turn. We'll probably spend most of our time on the compensation side. First of all, components of compensation. In other words, what makes up the stuff that you get in order to live on? And there's really three, possibly four. There's your salary, and we'll talk about what the distinction is. There's your housing allowance. There's a SICA allowance, because as a minister, as ordained clergy, you actually have a dual tax status, and the SICA allowance allows us to account for that. And then there is the health insurance allowance. I put possibly there because not all situations, not all employment situations would require a health insurance allowance, but it can, for many of you, be part of your overall compensation. Regarding housing allowance, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that, but Dave Anderegg, Paul Chi, they've done really some good work on some FAQ videos that are available for you at genevabenefits.org if you'd like to review housing allowance and guidelines for housing allowance. So these are the components of compensation. This is income to you. Now, there's a special thing that happens with what we call your payroll taxes or your Social Security Medicare taxes. Your tax status before ordination falls on one track. In other words, your salary has a federal tax, a state tax, and what we call FICA component to it, where you're paying 7.65% to cover your Medicare and Social Security, okay, requirement. Now, what's happening behind the scenes, and that you might not realize, is the church as employer for someone who is not ordained is covering the other 7.65%. And so what is going into the Social Security Medicare system is a total of 15.3%. So and our team travels to seminaries, and the big thing that we talk about when we go to the seminary is this distinction of your tax status before ordination and your tax status after ordination. The world changes for you. And if you're not careful, if you're not paying attention to it, this could trip you up. And so the one thing I say to seminarians, and if you're a seminarian here on our webinar, it's call us. And I'm going to repeat that over and over again. We want to be there to help you understand the nature of the transition. And this is moving from this tax status before ordination to your dual tax status is very significant for you to understand. And so you'll notice, okay, here you've got basically one arrow, salary, federal, state, and FICA on that salary. After ordination, you have a dual status. Notice there's two arrows here. You've got a SECA payment covering your Social Security, Medicare obligation, but there's also federal and state taxes. You'll notice that housing allowance is excluded from federal and from most state taxes. There are probably some states, I do believe, that do still tax the housing allowance, but for the most part, housing allowance is excluded from federal and state tax. However, if you look on the other side, the SECA covers that whole amount, housing allowance plus salary, and that SECA is at a rate of 15.3% because the minister is responsible for the entire amount going into the Social Security Medicare system. Now, there might be ways, when we say responsible, we're saying that basically, unlike what happened before, let me go back, where you're only paying 7.65, when you're ordained, you're covering the whole thing. And that is why we want to be able to do kind of a gross up or provide an allowance to cover the difference between 15.3 minus 7.65. That commitment that was kind of behind the scenes, paid by the organization, is now made explicit in the SECA allowance. And this, we believe, is a very important thing to call out in a distinct and separate way from your other sources of income as tracked on your payroll stub or your W-2. All right, so you might have some questions about that. If you do, put them in the comments or chat box. We'll get back to those. I'm gonna just stop here for a second. Dave or Ingrid, anything that would be important for us to add, anything that you see coming across? Okay, very good. Now, here is something that is really challenging. In other words, how do you determine adequate compensation? So we have the compensation box there as part of the overall call package. How do you do that? Well, the first thing that is brought to bear is the salary practices at the church that is calling you. Now, salary practices at churches, they can be good best practices or they can be bad practices. In other words, they might have ways they do things, but those ways might not be really that good for actually determining what compensation could be. But it is something that when you are looking at compensation and what is fair, what is reasonable, what addresses the concerns of the BCO so that you can do ministry, and we would even say the Apostle Paul's concerns, we have to consider what the practices are at the church. Now, the other thing that we do, and it's a bit of a, I want to say triangulation, but there's more than three things here. What we're doing is we're also looking at other mechanisms for helping us understand what compensation might be. So that might be comparable employment. I was a church planter, and one of the things that was recommended as a church planter was to look at the salary of someone in the public school system, since those salaries were available and known. And the hard part there is to say, okay, where do I match? Am I a principal at a elementary school, a middle school, a high school, an associate principal? So you have to make some determinations. I planned it at in Athens, Georgia, so it's the University of Georgia there. So we had some public data as well in terms of work at the university. Another method for helping determine adequate compensation is, what's your budget? This is a budget, a family budget is so important for so many reasons. It's important for financial wellness, for retirement readiness, but it's also important as we determine appropriate compensation in your call package. And so family budget might be, hey, I know what it costs for me to live because I'm tracking where my money goes. Now, that might have limited utility, particularly if you move from maybe a more suburban area or rural area to a more urban area, maybe from one region of the country to another, but your family budget is a very important aspect or method for helping you determine compensation. And then there's the data-driven methods. These are going out and using the administrative committee's salary survey. This could be using, Christianity Today has a salary survey as well. We know that some churches are in a consortium of churches in their area or churches within the PCA that exhibit similar characteristics. And this is really a data-driven approach. It's saying, okay, what are the numbers and how do I use that to help determine compensation? And then finally, there are living wage calculators. Basically, what does it cost me and my family to live in a certain area at a certain level of that's appropriate for my ministry context and where God has called me to be. And so again, it's not one of these methods, it's a variety of methods that are brought together to help you figure out compensation. We're available to help. Again, I'm going to say that over and over again, and we're available to bring these things to bear to help you think through it. This could be with you as the pastor. This could be you if you're the lay leadership in the church. This could be also presbyteries. You're trying to make evaluations on whether a package is reasonable for a person that will be ministering in your bounds. So number of mechanisms that are available. Not one is used exclusively. A number of these are brought to bear. We're available to help with bringing these different tools to your particular situation. Yeah, Dave, please.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, Don, that, sometimes the church budget is a consideration as well. And just depending on where the church is, it may be that they're not able to provide the kind of compensation maybe that they want to provide or should provide.
Yeah.
And in those cases, I've seen in a number of presbyteries, and Don, you've probably been more of a witness to this than I have, where the presbyteries will challenge and say, look, this is okay if both of you are agreeable now, but what can the church do over the next few years to kind of get this package where it needs to be, that sort of thing?
Yeah. Also, in my experience, I was a church planter in Athens, Georgia. And so I wore the hat of both an employer and an employee. And I was raising the money for my own salary or my own compensation. And you're wanting to kind of get into the field and do your work and not raise money, and you want to keep that number low. But look, if you try to do that, you're going to do a disservice to your family in the long run and the church as well. But Dave's point's well taken. We might have an idea of what this should be. We might not be able to deliver that idea all in the moment. And so we have to partner. Again, the importance of communication, the importance of seeing the call package as an ongoing living agreement that you're constantly evaluating and referencing in order to get you to that place where you need to be so that you can minister effectively, support your family, and do all those things over the long haul. And the church budget is an opportunity, and the church budget could be a constraint. Yeah, thank you, Dave, for mentioning that. One thing that we think is so important, and Paul Chi, who's on here, he's not, his face isn't on here, but one thing that in working with sessions or personnel committees, one thing that he does is just say, look, you need to build in cost of living adjustments. They're really not negotiable, because if you don't do that, the minister is going to be losing ground. And so real easy to figure out how much ground you could potentially lose by kind of looking at, okay, theoretically, what would be the ground lost if you didn't get a increase in compensation based on inflation. And so the US Bureau of Labor Statistics comes out with this calculator. And so this calculator says $100,000 in January of 2024 has the same buying power as $81,614 in January 2019. Okay, now that's a lot of words and numbers. And so what we wanted to do is illustrate what that actually means, okay? Basically, we're looking at equivalent purchasing power and how that decreases over time if cost of living is not applied to someone's compensation. So today, you're going to have 100,000 at 100,000. But 20 years ago, you're going to be off the mark by 40%. You're going to lose that spending or purchasing power. It's going to be the equivalent of 60K 20 years ago. But we don't even have to go back that far. 5 years back, the example that I used here, the 81,614, if you look at that, just 5 years back, a 19% loss in purchasing power. So cost of living adjustments, talking about those things are so important in building into our compensation models. So team, anything else you would like to add to that before I move on? Really important concept.
So Don, what you're saying is if 10 years ago I had a call package of 100,000, it would only buy today, basically 76,000 in goods and services.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's very important.
Yes. Good. Yep. Thank you. Understand this. Understanding this is really critical to the health, your longevity in your call, and to the health of the financial health of your family as well. Okay, let's take a look at retirement. There's a lot that could be said here, but we might have some webinars. We're looking to do some webinars down the road that might be focused on retirement questions. But two things I want to look at here. In the use of the retirement plan and the church's use of the retirement plan, that retirement plan is known as a 403b-9. It's just the place where you find it in the IRC, the Internal Revenue Code. It's where you could look it up. It's a little bit, I guess, further down than the 401k section because it's a few numbers. It's a little bit larger. But the 403b-9 has significant and important features for those in ministry along the lines of tax savings and stable income over the long haul for the time that you're in retirement. And so what I want to do is look at the tax savings first. You are in the 403b-9 allowed to contribute a much greater amount of money than you would be allowed to contribute in an IRA. And what you're then doing is you're lowering your taxable amount. So that what you have to pay on April 15th is somewhat less. Higher contributions allow this to happen. Pastor or ministerial contributions are not subject to SECA tax. And what that means is that 15.3%, you're not paying that when it's going in. You're certainly not paying federal, you're not paying state tax. That's true even for lay people, but you have the additional advantage of not paying that 15.3. And let's say that you took that money out and you even wanted to get a traditional IRA, you're paying a premium of 15.3% in order for the privilege of buying that, purchasing that IRA. And so you're just basically, from an investment, you're just throwing money out the door. And it's just not to your best interest. So if you have, and this is something that we do as financial planners, we look at optimizing your contribution strategies. And if you're married, your contribution strategy with your spouse so that we can maximize the tax implications of contributing to the retirement plan. Really important there. And then finally, and we don't take this for granted that people know this, but you are eligible to take housing allowance. If you're a minister, you can take housing allowance in retirement. And so think of it this way. You could put $1 in pre-tax, in other words, not pay $1 on it, let that grow at investment rates, and then you can pull that money out, assuming you have enough housing allowance there. Again, I refer you to the FAQ videos that are on our website. You can take that money out and not have any tax burden associated with that money. It's a huge, huge benefit. If that's something that doesn't make sense to you, or you want to talk about it some more, again, you're gonna see how to be able to you're gonna be able to reach out to us to talk with us about these issues.
Don,
So
there's some
yeah,
there's some
Dave, please.
specific ones on retirement in there. There's at least FAQs. We've got a couple of FAQs out there where there's some specific ones that speak to taking house allowance in retirement, and we get a lot of calls about that. So maybe something you want to look at. But yeah, all your distributions, all your withdrawals are going to at least be eligible. You still have some limits, but they're going to be eligible. The FAQs will go into a lot more detail if you want to look at it.
Ingrid?
Oh, we have a question coming in about opting out of Social Security.
Okay.
So I feel like that's a big,
Yeah,
Thank you,
this is a great time to talk about that. And we'll remind you, I'll give you the short answer, don't do it. But what I'd like to do is Dave feels he's had to do this longer than I have, and he has really a passion for why ministers need to stay in Social Security. So Dave, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and just kind of address that from a practical consideration. In other words, why does the IRS even allow you to do that? But then also, if you could just address it from the implications of doing that and what the dangers are for the minister and his spouse.
Yeah, obviously working here, the Geneva Benefits is in charge of the relief fund and operates the relief fund for the PCA as well. So we often see the results of what happens when people opt out. In fact, a lot of the people that are needing relief later in life are those who have opted out or the spouse of someone who's opted out. It just sort of pulls the safety net out from under them. But there's only one reason you can opt out anyway. You can't opt out for any economic reasons or political reasons. You don't think that the government ought to be in public insurance business, or I've heard a lot of reasons, but there's only one on the form. And when you sign the form, you're certifying that that's the reason you're opting out. And that reason basically is that you believe because you're a pastor, because you're a minister, that you should not or cannot receive that money in retirement. What's interesting is I found very few people that actually voice that concern. I think a lot of people opt out because others encourage them to or tell them to. Maybe it's a good friend, maybe it's a CPA, or maybe it's a financial guru of some sort that they're following. But the reality is you can't just opt out because you don't want to pay the tax, or you're really tight and you need that money back in your budget. Certainly that's how everybody feels and would like to opt out, but you need to examine that. It's Form 4361. You need to examine that very carefully before you think about opting out, and the ramifications on that. We don't have the time it would take to tell you all of the ramifications, but don't forget, it's not just retirement. It's also Medicare Part A that can be lost. It's any kind of disability coverage that gets lost. It's coverage for your kids if God calls you home. It's all kinds of things that you can lose in a situation like that. So it's worth talking about, and we'd love to talk to you about it if you'd like to talk further about that.
Good, thank you, Dave. Now I'll put on my clerk hat. There is a requirement to speak about this with the body that ordains you. And I think we often miss that, we don't see that. And it's not that they can speak into it. In other words, I can't, because I disagree with someone, I can't, it's not like credentials or exception or something like that. But you do need to indicate that to your presbytery that you plan on opting out. Again, we just ask you, call us, at least allow us to talk with you and kind of explain in greater detail why we think, one, you're eligible to do that, reiterate that, but two, why we think that would create a very difficult situation for you and your spouse in your retirement years. So good, thank you for that question. really important question. I'm glad we were able to highlight that. So, let's go ahead and move on. Stable income. That's why we put money into the retirement plan, so that we have enough income in our retirement years. Now, what's going on is a huge demographic shift in the past 100 years. So this comes from the United States Census Bureau. If you look, we've gone from what they call a pyramid to a pillar, and they're laying this out and projecting it moving forward to 2060. A long time ago, not a lot of people lived to their later years. However, that's changing and will continue to change radically, where more people will live longer, okay? And that right there puts pressure on stable income in retirement. You have to save enough, and then you have to solve for what we call, and when we say solve, we mean account for your longevity. And so again, this is a place where you can reach out to us. We can help you with strategies to figure out how you and your spouse can achieve your goal of having stable income all throughout your retirement years. We just think this is a really important for people to understand, that it's going to take a good bit of money for you to live in retirement. And the chances are both of you or one of you are going to live a much longer life. And we want to make sure that we can account for that. So tax savings with the 403(b)(9 and a platform to provide stable income for you later in life. And like I said, we could have whole seminars, and we do, or webinars on these topics, and we probably will. Stay tuned. We'll probably have some more through the rest of this calendar year. Okay, I want to look at healthcare and protection from what we call mitigating risk. I want to look at the insurances. This is going to be a very brief look. Healthcare is a whole discussion in and of itself, as along with protecting yourself from financial loss. Protecting you and your family, you need the church should provide group life insurance. Now, rarely is the employer life insurance sufficient for the life insurance needs that you have. And I would say that just by way of clarification, this is what we call group term life insurance. It acts like your car insurance. You pay it every month, and if you don't have an accident, it just goes away. However, if you have an accident, it covers what needs to happen to repair your car. Likewise, term insurance, life insurance, if you don't pass away, then that money just goes away. But at the point that you do, then of course it pays it out to your beneficiaries. Important for the church to provide this for you, as we would talk with you if you're a pastor or a church worker. We would speak with you about the importance of individual term life insurance as well. Short and long-term disability insurance. Gosh, the longer I am at Geneva, the more and more I'm seeing the importance of these types of insurance being in place in order to provide steady income for those that can't work for any number of reasons. And I can't highlight the importance of getting these things in place. It protects not only your family, but it also protects your church. Many churches would not be able to support a minister who went on disability over the long haul. And so the question is, how can the church do that? By providing, if appropriate, short-term as well as long-term disability insurance. And then we have kind of cash flow insurances, dental and vision insurance. And look, I had 4 kids. My wife and I went to the dentist. We did it 2 times a year. That was 12. It was sure nice to be part of a buying network and a negotiated rate for to have the dental insurance there. Same with vision. It was good to be able to get the glasses. These are important in understanding kind of outflows of money and how you manage, taking care of your teeth and taking care of your eyes. So these are risk mitigating benefits that need to be in place. Of course, healthcare, health insurance also needs to be in place, and there are a variety of ways that that can be put into place. If you have questions about that, please reach out to us. We just don't have the time to do that in this webinar, though we have done seminars on that as well. Counseling, well-being. The idea when a pastor is called into the ministry is that that pastor and their family would be there for the long haul. And so it does nobody any good to kind of burn them out, not provide them the items that are needed in order to help increase the possibility that that family, and particularly that minister, would be able to minister in that church context over the long haul. And so sabbaticals are very critical. We have a lot of resources. We're putting a lot of energy into sabbaticals, the importance of them, how to structure them. Reach out to us. We'll get you set up with the well-being folks in our organization. Counseling, likewise, executive coaching, number of things could fall into this category. Basically, opportunities for personal growth, opportunities to talk with those who can help you work through issues that might be going on with your family, that might be going on with your church, that are quite inappropriate to talk about in, say, the church context. And so bringing those resources to bear are really significant. Likewise, you need to have a good sick day policy. You need to have a very good vacation policy. Encourage you to have a policy for covering ongoing education. There's a number of things, additional things that occur here in the well-being space. Don't see these as kind of add-ons afterwards. Build these into the call package on behalf of your ministers at the forefront. And again, since this is an ongoing document, constantly reflect as a church about the pastor, as a pastor, as you're serving the church, reflect on what you need in order to do the work that God has called you to do, okay? Can't stress the well-being, putting the right well-being components into place. All right, what we're going to do is kind of wrap this up so we have ample time for questions. We are here to talk with you about your call package. Whether you're a seminary student taking your first call, whether you are moving, considering taking a new call at a new church, if you are a pastor who's been at your church for a while, we can talk with you and evaluate your current call package as well. If you're here and you're a member of a session or a personnel committee or an administrator, we're here to support you as well. I will say this, when we do our consultations, when we engage with you and we engage with the church, it is to be advocates for both. We never put this in an adversarial kind of relationship. We're looking for a win-win for the minister and his family, for the church, as they figure out what they need to do to support this minister. And that's what we do. The consultation also is available for retirement readiness. As you're in those, particularly as you're in those final years, maybe you're 50 and older, you're looking at those final years of income production. Retirement readiness becomes a very important question for you. And then as you look at what your spend down is from that retirement account or accounts. Financial wellness, you're early on in life. You've got goals for how you'd like to pay for college for your children or private school, or you're in debt. These are places where we can help you. But we specifically here are talking about call packages. Our consultation is free. We also have online resources that are available for you. And again, 3 conversation partners. So we have a resource for presbytery, we have a resource for church, and we have a resource for ministers. We're here to help you. There's a lot of things that go on in terms of call packages that are not straightforward. And I'll just throw this up here, and the idea is to overwhelm you. But this worksheet is so critical as you look at the structure of your call package, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of moving parts, but you need to know what's my tax obligation or what's my take-home pay? What am I going to get every pay period? Because then you can figure out, if you're moving into a new call, how much house you can afford. All right. You can answer the practical questions. Looking at this, I'm showing it to you because it's not meant to be easy, but it's meant to show you that there's a lot going on and this is important. And we are here to help you figure out those questions so that you can answer the other questions like, can I afford to take this call? What would I need? If I do take the call, how much house can I buy? Those very important questions, okay? And this is one of many tools that we use to help you in those decisions. I'm gonna leave you with these, the 4 don'ts of a call package. We can't state it strongly enough. Don't opt out of Social Security. Second, and I didn't go into much detail here, but don't take a lump sum. Many times we'll get a call from, particularly say younger ministers, going into a call and they say, man, the church has offered me $75,000. That's pretty awesome. And we go, that may be awesome, but what we need to do is we need to look at it and lay it out. And I brought you back to our worksheet and say, okay, don't just multiply or divide that by 12 and say, oh, that's what's going to be coming to me. No, you've got to understand, and we can help you do that. What makes up that call package? Where would that 75,000 have to go? The lump sum does not help you. The lump sum does not help the church. And matter of fact, if the church tries to say, hey, we're giving you a lump sum and you can do with this money whatever you want, just say, can we talk to Geneva Benefits? Because I think they can help us sort through this. We can't stress that enough. Dave, do you have were you?
Yeah, one of the reasons why I think it's really important to structure this alongside the church is because if you don't, they think, and look at this particular call package, you can see the very first column there that's kind of shaded, a bluish, purplish kind of color, 110,000 at the bottom. You can see, well, this is a $110,000 call package. And so, the church, basically the leadership of the church and the entire church thinks you've got a $110,000 salary. They don't really know that you're taking home 80 of that, and that 30,000 of it is going to benefits and taxes, and that's the real cost to you. If you look at this, that's what's happening. But between your different benefits packages and so forth, you've basically got about 80,000 going home. Look at the second column all the way to the bottom. It says 80,695. You've got 6,700 a month to live on in the yellow down there, and so. If you don't structure it, they think they're paying you more than they are, as far as what they think you have to live on. And you're likely to think you have more than you do, and maybe even move into a community and buy too much house, or buy a newer car or bigger car or more expensive car than you could really afford, because you don't know what the bottom line take home is of a lump sum package. So that's the net salary is what both of you need to see and what everybody needs to understand. Sorry about that, Don.
No, perfect, Dave. Thank you. Don't opt out of Social Security. Don't take a lump sum. Don't be fearful to have conversations with the decision makers in your church related to your call package and items in your call package, or the structure of the call package, or the total compensation. Sometimes we think that's just not a spiritual thing to do. I want you to eliminate that from your thinking. I want to remind you that God uses the ordinary means. And guess what? Money's part of the ordinary means that God uses to accomplish his purposes. Now, there are right ways and wrong ways to do this, okay? And we can coach you through what those might be. You don't want to come in all fired up and really not establish a context for dialogue. But you can't shy away from it either. So really encourage you to not be fearful to have these conversations. But the big thing is, please don't forget to call us. We are here for you. We certainly have resources that are available for you. Remember, there's 3 conversation partners: pastors, the church, presbytery. We've got resources for you out there, but we are here to serve you, to help you, to make sure that you can do the things that God has called you to do in the context that he's called you to do, and for your church to help for them to understand that as well and what needs to be put into place. There's a QR code here that will take you to the place where we have these resources available, and will also take you to a place where you can reach out to us if you have additional questions, and you can meet with one of our financial planners. But at this point, Ingrid, I'd like to go ahead and open it up to any questions that we can take. And Dave, I'm going to have you also just make sure that you're available to take these questions as well. Can't hear you. Unmute, please.
Dave and I have been trying to answer questions as we've got along.
Okay.
There's one question about a cell phone allowance and how that might be handled. I know how we handle it here at Geneva.
Yeah.
If you'd like to address that.
Sure, Dave, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, typically that's a business expense of the church. Provide a phone for an employee is a business expense for every other business in town. And what you want to do is just have an accountable reimbursement program where either they pay that bill directly in your behalf, excuse me, or you go out, you get the phone plan and you bring in your bill and they reimburse a certain percentage of it, a dollar amount, something that makes sense. Sometimes that's the best way to do it, because if they do it that way, you can couple it with another phone or two, depending on the size of your family, and kind of get some economies of scale in your plan. But generally think of it as a business expense of the church. It's not something that should be in your call package directly, but just be reimbursed to you by the church. That's the best way to handle it.
Okay. The key thing there is it's an expense. It's not an income category. Here's the issue. If you do not document it, in other words, if you don't submit documentation to get reimbursed, it has to be treated as income, and you don't want to do that. As Dave said, you want it to be a reimbursable expense. And there's a number of other, Dave, why don't you just mention what some of those other expenses could be that are reimbursable?
Oh, well, there are a lot of things. Books, for example, which is usually a pastor needs a 12-step program for books. But what you want to do is be sure to be able to reimburse materials that you use, books and other things at the church, taking people to lunch, maybe, or showing up for a men's breakfast meeting, the cost of the breakfast. Those kinds of things can be reimbursed to the church's business expenses. So when you do the church budget, you set up categories for those things, for cell phones, for other types of things that you plan to reimburse. You want to reimburse travel to presbytery, travel to General Assembly, all those kinds of things as well. All that's reimbursement, not really shouldn't really be considered part of the call package.
Right. Right. So that's a huge distinction there. It's not part of the call package, but it's part of what it means to bring you on board so that you can be appropriately use the term success in the right way. So you can be equipped to do the things that you need to do in that church context.
Don, there's a good section on accountable reimbursements in the call package guidelines, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
So
I
I
should be
think,
in all of them, so you could read about it.
Good.
Go ahead.
Ingrid?
okay, I'm saying that someone in the chat had said, should professional expense allowance be part of the call package? And you're saying no, that should be part of the church budget.
I think the church should have a clear distinction between what is related to the call package and what is related to the things that the pastor has to do in order for the ministry to achieve success. So you could say, well, they need to have a building to worship in. It could go really kind of crazy. That is a component of the nature of what's called. The big thing is we don't want those things hitting income so that the minister then is forced to pay taxes on it. So I think it is important to have a robust discussion about, paying for mileage for driving. What's the expectation for meals? Is there a cell phone expense category? Those types of things. So I do think you talk about it, but it's clear that it's not part of anything related to the compensation that the minister is receiving. It's not compensation, it's the cost of doing business.
So so with what you're saying, then the educational benefit would also be classified in that same way, you would suggest?
Dave, is this where we need to say we're not tax professionals? But no.
Well, we're not tax professionals, Tom, but we do pretend to be tax professionals in
No, we
webinars.
don't.
Um, but you know, honestly, there are a couple of categories you need to get your arms around, because different types of education, there's a certain amount that the church can pay for someone for educational purposes every year, but you're going to need to look that up and talk with your CPA or an accountant about that. We could probably look it up and give you some idea of what that limit is. Continuing education as well is something that the church can provide. Pursuit of a D-min or something like that. Again, there's a certain amount each year. So this is a tax question, and a question that the church, in the church budget, would need to be looking into to decide how much they can afford to budget for a particular thing and whether that's a tax-free benefit or not to you. And good CPA can run that down for you. We can maybe send you a copy of a page or two out of a guide or something along those lines too. Be glad to help if we can.
Yep. We can point you to resources. We have to be careful. We can't make blanket statements.
Okay, so there's another discussion about the church manse. So the question is, pros and cons, I guess, would be the question.
You know,
is there savings involved to the church? Is there ease of movement for the pastor?
a long time ago, it was much more common for a pastor to be in a manse. I remember growing up in my Baptist church, and our pastor lived on the house that was on the property. It was built when the church was built. But what was interesting, and this made an impression upon me, even then, he went out and bought a house in our area because he was concerned about not having a place to go to once he owned once his time in ministry was in that ministry context was over. Now, here tends to be the modern issue, which is, and churches are wrestling with this. If you're in an expensive area, how do you bring a resource into your area in a way that they can minister there? And what if they can't buy a house? And so once again, a manse might come into play in order to allow that minister and his family to be located near where the church is or where a majority of the congregants are of that church. And that's an interesting use. I think a more modern day use of the manse is kind of providing a mechanism for a minister to be able to live in the area, he and his family, that might otherwise be prohibitive. Okay. Dave, go ahead.
No, and the other is the timing of it. You know, for a young guy coming into a church with a 3 to 5 year horizon, I'm thinking a youth guy, assistant pastor, a guy that, you know, maybe has aspirations of moving up and preaching somewhere. A 3 to 5 year horizon is pretty good in a manse, because you don't have all the costs of moving in, all the closing costs of buying something, having the trouble of having to sell that house when you leave, possibly getting caught with that house and making payments in another house in another place, and just all the mess you can get into. It takes usually 3 to 5 years, for a house to appreciate enough to overcome the cost of buying it and selling it, because you got the commission and selling it. So for the short-term guy, it makes a lot of sense. For the long-term guy, it's a killer. And what I mean by that is we see people who've been in manses 30 plus years essentially retiring homeless. And so you don't want to do that. If this is a long-term call and you sense it, maybe start in the manse. But at some point, once you've been there a while, if this looks like it's a career call for you, then we need to start talking, you know, and get the session involved with what they can do to potentially rent that manse, maybe use it for another, if it's a large enough church, a youth or assistant, and get you some type of housing allowance so that you can buy something where you can develop equity. So that's my thoughts on the timing of a manse.
Ingrid, we've got 5 minutes. How are we doing on our questions?
Right. Well, I'm currently trying to answer a question that's come in from Bill Gleason. Hey, Bill. should insurance employer 403B contributions disability SECA allowance be considered compensation or cost of doing business related to having a minister?
Yeah.
So I was just saying that there are really two ways to look at this. One would be the call package way, and the other would be the tax way. So that's as far as I've gotten on my answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
again, when I say the cost of doing business, to bring in a pastor also is the cost of doing business, but it's a cost understood in a different way. Okay, so when we're talking about a contribution to the 403b9, we're talking about something, a cost to the church that's fundamentally different than reimbursing for a cell phone. Okay, the one is appropriate for the call package, namely how contributions are made to the 403b9, whether those actually are employer or employee contribution, that is critical. Insurance, it is the cost of doing business, but it's related not to the broader budget concerns of the church. It's related to the call package of the minister. So that is part of this discussion. So
It
yes,
is.
Go ahead, Dave.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, Don. You're exactly right. It is part of this discussion, but I think it's a really insightful question, Bill, because the reality is it's the difference between a call package and how the world in a business environment structures their cost. They're going to structure all their human resource costs, all those benefits and taxes and payroll taxes and all that stuff as a business expense. They don't lump it in with compensation like salary. And so it really gets at the heart of this whole seminar, right? We do things so differently in the church. And the church has always structured a call package to include all of those things, which is part of what leads to the confusion and the inflation of the amount, making it look like a pastor's earning more than he is. But you're right, those are business expenses for a normal business. It's just that churches do things so differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Thank you. Ingrid, we've got a minute left.
Let's see. Dan has let us know that the IRS limit for tuition reimbursement is $5,250 each year. So I'm sure that's adjusted. So you might want to come back and look at it every year. Often adjusted for these limits, including your contribution limits to our plan, are edited yearly for inflation. So that we're keeping up with inflation. So thank you though for that information.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good.
Well, let me go ahead and I'm going to wrap us up here just by thanking those that are attending this webinar. Thanking you for your time. I know your time is valuable, and I want to restate, we're here to serve you. However we can do that, reach out, call us, email us, go to our website and set up a time to talk to us. It would be our privilege to be able to serve you in that way. So again, thank you for your time. My fellow panelists, thank you also for your time, and God bless you as you continue on with your day.